This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today, we are going to get into clandestine drug labs, challenges facing law enforcement, and the always dynamic criminal element. For that, I have Charles Noonan on the show. Charles is the head of narcotics training at the SoRite Company. Formerly, Charles was a DE operational and hazardous site supervisor with 26 years of experience, responsible for tactical assaults on clandestine laboratories, as well as their complex dismantling and decontamination. Charles has significant undercover experience investigating narcotic smuggling networks in Mexico, the US, Europe, and South America. Welcome to you, Charles.
Hello, good morning.
Thanks for being on here. I'll give a quick shout out to Evan from Fortress Communications for hooking us up here. He's been doing an awesome job sending me good guests. So I want to make sure we mention the mutual connection there. And obviously, I've had a few people on from the SoRite Company. So I'm glad to have you on here as well. You've been sending me some really good guests. So I'll continue to have you guys on and chat a bit about your business there. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about you and your background. You've obviously done a lot, 26 years of experience with the DEA. So we'll kind of start with you and just talk how you actually got into working with the DEA and what your career path looked like through there.
Oh, okay. I actually grew up on a farm near a village in Nebraska. The town's name is Colon, Nebraska. I joined the military immediately out of high school. That was going to be my career path. I went into law enforcement there. While I was there, the DEA had done some investigations that affected some of our military personnel. So I volunteered to do undercover. When I changed locations, I went from Utah to England. And while I was there, I did a lot of undercover. I was in the military for 8 years, my first enlistment. And 4 of those, it was kind of interesting. I didn't wear a uniform and I had long hair. I had a really unique position because I was going all over Florida and England buying drugs in support of our mission to identify any connection to the military bases or our military personnel. So that's where I started working narcotics. And then I found out about DEA and I changed my course. I decided to go to college then because I needed a degree. And I was a police officer after I got out of the military. Okay. For 3.5 years, I was a police officer in Omaha, Nebraska, and then I went to DEA. So I actually been doing this for about 39 years before I retired from DEA after 26.5 years. But while I was in the military, I did get, you'd call it hazardous, military hazardous materials training, which is what we call NBC back then. Now it's called CBRN. NBC is nuclear, biological, chemical. Ran around with chemical suits and the old gas masks and sitting in foxholes. And then when I got out, I went to DEA. I started working, got into the clandestine drug laboratory program. And I worked heavily in that my last 20 years with DEA.
Okay. I didn't know that the military had that kind of a program. I'd never heard of that.
Well, there's chemical warfare in the military. So yeah. If you think about it, you've probably heard of certain chemical agents, and it's a threat. So as part of our training, we have to train for the potential use of chemical munitions or chemical sprays or any kind of delivery system. So a lot of people in the military have gone through that type of training, and especially when our job was to protect military bases. So we had to be in foxholes around the base and be ready for anything that might come. So we had to be ready for that type of threat.
Well, I was talking about, you were saying you did like undercover, you were buying stuff in and around bases or anything that could affect the bases? So like the undercover aspect of it.
Yes, I did. I started that in England. I used to go around on base, and I would supervise investigations on base, and then anything where we would identify people bringing it onto the base, I would go to bars and clubs where our military would hang out or socialize.
Mm-hmm.
And if there were drugs available there, I'd go buy them. It's kind of interesting. It was in England, so I was actually doing this before it was legal for police to do this. There are very hardline rules and laws in England. So I would go out and buy drugs. I ended up testifying. We ended up having some really good prosecutions with the British government. I ended up testifying in Crown Court, which is where they wear the white wigs, and
Okay.
barristers and everybody were very formal, and that was a pretty unique experience while I was there. And then I did the same thing in Florida in my last about 2 years. I actually cross-trained as an OSI agent, which is the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. So you're a federal agent for the military.
Wow, very cool. And you know what? You've been to multiple countries, as I mentioned in the bio. Any place in particular that you would say maybe you learned the most from, or was maybe an environment that lent the most to learning about all the drugs and the drug trade? Like might have been worse than others.
Probably, at least at the time I was there, one of the most dangerous places was El Salvador. But I was there training and teaching El Salvadorian government. I was teaching for our international training with DEA. But as it came to narcotics, actually working undercover, I actually worked undercover in Colombia on 2 separate occasions. I went there, I had undercover negotiations for maritime cases. And I actually had RCMP undercovers that were working with me on that.
Okay.
And I was also stationed in Ecuador, but I've been to Ecuador quite a bit. But anywhere in South America, Central America, you're going to get an idea of the impact of the drug trade. You see how it affects law enforcement in foreign countries. Even when I was in Europe, you see the impact of anything related to drugs and terrorism. They go hand in hand. So you see the impact and how drug trafficking organizations use the same smuggling routes. They use the same smugglers. They use the same false identification routes and people. And the drugs and the terrorism go hand in hand. A lot of terrorist organizations use narcotics to support or to fund their terrorist activities. So it all ties together. When you see it on that worldwide level, it's a big difference. Versus working just street level. And I don't want to say just street level. That's the most dangerous part of working narcotics in my opinion, is the street level. But you get the full encompassing idea about how that smuggling and how the foreign relationships and foreign laws affect everything that even happens in the United States and to our citizens.
I think that gets lost on a lot of people. This is a good segue into kind of more of the topics we're going to talk about in the current events. But I would say, at least in the Canadian environment, I don't watch a ton of American news, but in the Canadian environment, nobody ever really talks about the big picture. It's the street level stuff, like, hey, there was a shooting down the street, or something happened, but it's never really connected to those bigger narratives. And unfortunately, that also has an effect on the politics, what the politicians choose to focus on, or what they do and do not tell you about what's going on. It also directs money, so all the funding and resources. So, can you talk a little bit about the connections that maybe you were working on, or that you had come across in all your years of experience, when you talk like the terrorism, the state-sponsored crime connected to cartels, how it gets to the street level? Like, can you kind of draw that connection out?
Sure. I actually would teach terrorism and narco-terrorism for DEA for about 20 years and multiple different agencies and around the country. It's impossible not to correlate the two together. Like I said, they're all using the same systems. They're using illegal trafficking means. They use the same smugglers. And if it's not the same smugglers, they're going to probably use the same routes. And again, they have the same background things. They're all end up being involved in smuggling and human trafficking.
Yeah.
Because they need people to be workers to take the fall if anything goes wrong. In the United States, you see illegal immigrants that, especially in Miami, when I was here, we had a lot of illegal immigrants. They would be living in a house that had an illegal grow operation or a processing center. That way, they're the ones who are there when the police arrive, not the main organizers and managers and the bosses.
Yeah.
So the human smuggling, and that's the saddest part of it, the human trafficking side of it. But they all also attack our youth, both terrorists and drug traffickers. They attack our youth. They go after our youth. It's a recruiting thing, whether it's for users or soldiers. Yeah. They're going to abuse those naive people. They're going to look for people that maybe don't have a very good, like a family structure, who are out on the street, maybe wandering around looking for something to belong to. It's a very simple thing. You draw them in and you show them some sense of belonging, and they're going to glom onto it.
Yeah, we had there was an article that was written in the media up here, and it's one of the few I've seen that actually kind of talked about how the street gangs were connected to some higher level stuff. And it basically was talking about how a street gang was connected to cartels. And I remember even within the police service, people were kind of laughing about it and going like, what the hell is this article talking about? And I was like, well, it's just like a degree of separation. Like the cartels, they'll push drugs to the Hells Angels, and then the Hells Angels will push it to the street gang. Like it's got to come from somewhere. Someone has to make this stuff, and then it goes to the distributor, and then the distributor gets it out onto the street. Like, but it's just it's kind of surprising. Like even within law enforcement, there's a lack of knowledge around this, and that's local law enforcement I'm talking. So would you say on the American side, do you see similar issues? Like there's like a disconnect, or do you think maybe your federal agencies who do see these connections, you guys are more integrated with some of that street level policing?
Well, there have been a lot of changes recently in smuggling and the drug flow into the United States. But even before that, such as we used to get a lot of fentanyl came in from China, and it would be shipped directly into the United States. And then China changed the laws because we pressured them to. And we had some agreements nationally. And then we watched where the Chinese organized crime was dealing directly with the cartels in Mexico. And they're using money laundering routes and all their money laundering and all their transportation routes. But instead of sending fentanyl to the United States, they started sending the precursors and the chemicals needed to make fentanyl. They sent it to Mexico. That's why Mexico became one of the largest producers of fentanyl and one of the largest delivery systems into the United States. We already had enough trouble with heroin and cocaine coming up through South America into Mexico. So you have the same people doing the same illegal activities. They're happy to expand into another drug that makes them a lot of money. So you have these multinational organizations, criminal organizations that are working together directly to circumvent the laws to make money by producing illegal drugs.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even like you mentioned there, the state has to be involved in it. So that was political pressure on China to get them to change some things, change some laws. I mean, that's at the politicians' level, right? So
Correct.
They have a part to play in this too, if they're not directly involved in doing some of this stuff, depending on the country. So can you talk a bit about the current environment we find ourselves in? Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff happening between Venezuela. It was El Mencho in Mexico. He was captured. So where do you kind of see things as it lies right now?
Well, especially from the U.S. perspective, you've got a lot of enforcement efforts taking place both inside the United States and outside. So you got political agreements between Canada and the United States and even those are they're political, and there's a lot of bantering back and forth. There's a lot of fighting back and forth regarding closing down the border and how much could be closed down, because over the border from Canada, we get fentanyl. We do get dangerous drugs. We also get smuggling of human smuggling comes over, people that want to come to the United States through Canada. So if we don't have that coordination, and now we do a little bit more, but you can tell between our top level governments, there are some disagreements that they're working through still.
Yeah.
So between the northern border with Canada for the United States, and then you have the southern border, they've gotten great help from Mexico. And you see how essentially our borders closed to human trafficking. We have a lot fewer immigration issues. So now our CBP, our Customs and Border Protection, our immigration folks can both focus on what their job really is. So CBP can watch the borders now, and we're getting more interdictions. With those, that's closing down and dropping the supply. Then you see the Caribbean with the direct assaults on the drug vessels, and people. That's funny. Watch people try to say these are fishing vessels. They're smuggling vessels that are full of tons of drugs. And I have to say this: it's one of the things that I think it's about. One of the more tragic arguments. People will say, "Well, those boats most likely have only cocaine on them when they're bringing it into the United States, but they're bringing in tons of cocaine." Well, people never took the time to look at the stats of deaths in the United States from drug overdoses. So yes, fentanyl, you hear about their overdoses all the time, but roughly about 28% of our overdose deaths in the United States are from cocaine.
Oh, really?
So we have over 100,000 a year. So you're looking at maybe 28,000 of those every year. So in 4 years, 100,000 people die of cocaine overdoses. So these points where people say you're blowing up vessels that have cocaine, where they say fentanyl is a big problem. All drugs, all these major drugs are a major problem.
Yeah.
But we do have the Caribbean. We're obviously extremely aggressive enforcement efforts there. We have the arrest of Venezuela's pseudo president, who wasn't a real president. It was a fake election. And he's been brought to the United States, and now Venezuela is cooperating with us on not only drug trafficking investigations, but oil supply. And then you look at El Seguro Cervantes' death. That was perpetrated by the Mexican government, which is great. There was some infighting. Now it's actually been reported that an American citizen, his stepson, is now the head, who went back down to Mexico. They're going to regroup, but all of those things are the result of more enforcement.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a confusing issue that happened just recently. We had the two apparently CIA employees and some Mexican high-level police who were killed in what appears to be a vehicle accident after they attacked a drug lab, a methamphetamine lab in Mexico. Now, the president of Mexico's apparently looking into that, saying, I don't know about that relationship, but you see these efforts that are going after the lab production in Mexico. The border's shut down. That doesn't mean the drugs are stopped, but they've been curtailed quite a bit. They've definitely been taking a hit. Our overdose deaths are down about 20% in the United States. That being said, the supply of many different types of drugs have been curtailed. They've been slowed coming into the United States. That affects the supply. That doesn't affect the demand.
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't have the demand affected, you have people who are willing to pay top price for these drugs because they're looking for that high. They're chasing that dragon. They're gonna want that product. And you have people in the United States, such as gangs. You've got the cartels that have people here. I don't know if you're aware of it. Just a few months ago, they actually, just in the same line of what I'm saying, we haven't seen a super lab, a Mexican cartel super lab in the U.S. for a while. They just seized one in Washington State that was mass producing methamphetamine. They seized it. The California authorities did that. That was just a few months ago. So when they see pressure coming from different areas, they're going to look at changing their smuggling routes. Mm-hmm. They always find new ways to hide drugs. And if they have a harder time getting the drugs into the country directly, they're probably going to change to bringing in the precursors, and then they're going to find places to produce the drugs here, because there's a lot of money to be made. So again, you don't have a reduction in demand, you have a reduction in supply. They make so much money doing this. This drug profession is very lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
So if they slow their money down and their productivity, they were making just as much, if not more, for all the human smuggling over the last 6 years. Really, the last 4 most. At 5-6 years, they were making ridiculous amounts of money for human smuggling. That's been curtailed. So they're going to look for ways to keep making very large sums of money. So they're going to change the routes. They're going to change the way they do it. In the United States, I think our professionals, and in Canada, should be looking for the possibility of resurgence of drug labs.
Well, I mean, Canada, I think, I don't know if it's a resurgence for us. I think it's always been here and we just don't do much about it. And that's a critique I've talked with many people across the nation about. Like it's actually pretty sad. Like the thing that comes into it is the political will and the stories that get put out there. And then it's like, well, what is the public pressure the politicians to focus on? Are we going after the things we should? Largely, and I think this was in the US too, but largely in Canada, policing shifted a lot to social work. We're doing a lot of jobs that traditionally weren't for us, or we would refer them to other services. So all those dollars kind of go away from doing the law enforcement. For us, it's the criminal code. So, less money in drug enforcement, less money in firearms, less money in gangs. Like it's, we go into spending our money in more at the end user of all this stuff, but we're not spending it on taking the whole system down, looking at the bigger picture of it all. That's a huge gap that we currently do struggle with up here. And I've worked a couple files with DEA. I've got friends in a few different agencies in the US, and I know some of the struggles that are had when working between the two countries. I think at the ground level, all the people want to do good work, and they're out there trying to get after it and find the bad guys and bad girls. But it's like once you go up the chain of command, then you start running into people got different priorities and hey, look over here, but we don't have a problem over there type stuff. So that's kind of been my experience. Before we do shift into talking just about the domestic supply, I did want to kind of ask you just about, obviously you've run some operations between countries and then stuff within the US. Do you find, is it more effective to send a few people to Colombia or Mexico and try to choke off a supply in a foreign nation? Is that more effective at stopping a problem, or is it better to, I don't know, wait for it to cross the border and then you try to take things down when it gets there?
Just like international smuggling is more effective, international enforcement is the key, and the countries and law enforcement from all different countries working together. It's if we just wait for it to come into our country, then we're going to miss. I mean, we miss a lot.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to interdict everything, so you have larger amounts coming in. But if we can go after the source, and as you say, I was stationed in Ecuador for 3 years, so we worked hand in hand with the Ecuadorians. But also, I worked cases in Peru, in Colombia. I mean, my last 15 years, did a lot of foreign cases, and that was done through coordination. That's done through enjoying good relations with foreign counterparts who have the same mission in mind. And you had talked about the reduction in funds. We can go back to that. I mean, I'd love to touch on it, but the international aspect of drug trafficking cannot be dismissed. So when we have our people overseas stationed in foreign countries where we have relationships with people, and that gives us that firsthand knowledge, it allows us to coordinate and share information and get information on our targets. We may identify them, but they're identified as a foreign citizen living in a foreign country. And we can't affect arrest there. But if we do our coordination, either that country will prosecute them in their jurisdiction, or maybe they'll extradite them to the United States, which we do a lot as well. So without that cooperation, you're not going to have and make anywhere near as big of a punch or have as much success in fighting drug trafficking, terrorism, human smuggling, counterfeit currency, counterfeit money laundering, counterfeit products such as clothing. Mm-hmm. These are all criminal operations that cost legitimate people and legitimate businesses and a lot of money, and they also cost people lives.
Well, and in my thinking, and this is something I try to talk to our higher ups or chain of command about, is why don't we shift the bottleneck, right? Like, why would I, as you were saying earlier, like, you wait for things to come in, you miss a lot of it, or you lose it, right? Like, lose stuff in surveillance all the time, or it gets offloaded and you didn't know they were offloading in a certain spot in your country. So, why wait for it to come across the border and you're spending $1 million, $2 million on a whole investigation that takes months and resources when, maybe I send 2 or 3 people down to whatever city that I have information, hey, it comes through here, or our informants tell us, you're one of the hubs. Can we work together and try to stop it here? And then maybe you even look at pushing it further back to right to a source country. I feel like it's cheaper to pay for a few people to spend a few weeks in a hotel in their per diems rather than waiting for it to cross your border. And then now, not only are you spending all the money on a giant investigation, but that product is in your communities and it's getting out there. So now you're also worried about possible deaths.
No, absolutely, and that's what we do. It's as I told you, I worked undercover. I actually had RCMP officers go undercover with me into Colombia on 2 different cases and 2 separate dates, and we had phenomenal investigations taking place. And what we end up doing is we take information to law enforcement in that country, and they end up arresting people in that country that are part of the chain of supply that ends up in the United States, and the drugs or the terrorism or the human traffickers. You actually end up arresting them in that country, and you have the entire smuggling route. You identify everybody, and you're able to take out an entire organization. That's what we always strive for. That's the goal.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the change in the supply. You mentioned it a couple times. So as these things have been happening around the world, there's concern, and this is something that you speak on, that production might shift to within the U.S. So can you talk a little bit about the concerns with that and what that might lead to?
Sure. Until about 15, 20 years ago, drug labs actually started kind of almost disappearing in the U.S. We still have them. They still occur. They're just a lot more rare. We had gone, and you go through phases there as well. We have used to have the big drug labs with all the glassware. They always find new ways to do it. The last iteration was essentially what we call the one pot, or the shake and bake lab. You can take a 2-liter soda bottle and a couple chemicals and some cold medicine, and you can make methamphetamine. Mm-hmm. You can make enough to make a living, and it could all fit in a backpack. That's one simple way. But then you also turn around, like I just described, the Mexican super lab that was up in Washington State, and they just seized another lab that wasn't a super lab. I just saw another article about another lab that was just seized there by DEA. They seem like they are coming back, because, again, it would be naive to think that the people who have this great demand for the drug, the user, is just going to say, well, I can't see it as much. Price is going up. I'm just going to stop.
Yeah.
That's likely not going to happen. So the demand is going to continue. So the smuggling route, the production mannerisms, and where it takes place is going to change. It always does. It would be naive not to think so. So that's just the reality of it. And we have to prepare for it. But the problem with 15, 20 years ago, and especially in the last 10 years, where I was teaching Clan Lab until just a month or two ago, Clan Lab certifications. We were hearing from all over the country, but I really haven't seen a lab. And then all of a sudden they're starting to say, yeah, we're starting to see more labs.
Is it in a particular area? Like, is there a certain...
all over the country. All over the country.
Everywhere.
It's starting to kind of pop up again. But the reality is we've lost a lot of experience. And drug labs are kind of a specialty. First off, you have to be trained. There are different types of training. One of the most important ones, in my opinion, is awareness training. That's where we go to fire departments and teach firefighters. We teach paramedics. We in a larger fashion, we teach all law enforcement, uniformed officers, narcotics investigators, anybody who's going out on the street, people working child services, because you end up going into these environments and there's a drug lab sitting right there. They don't even realize it. Because again, it's a 2-liter soda bottle with some odd looking stuff in it. And they might smell something out of place, but they're just not aware of it. Yeah. So the idea is when you have these, I can't tell you how many times I responded to an explosion or a fire that ended up being a drug lab. So you train our first responders to recognize these dangerous situations as soon as they arrive. Because when they walk in, now they're contaminated. So we have to worry about decontaminating them. But besides that, you also then have to have people trained to respond. And they have to have not just the training, they have to have the proper equipment. What we call PPE, which is personal protective equipment, includes respiratory protection, chemical suits, booties, gloves, and the right training to understand and see what kind of drug lab you have. Then we have to dismantle it. Then you also have to collect evidence. And then you have to take that all to the prosecution. But there's also the reality of how you make that prosecution the most effective by knowing how to read that laboratory, look at discarded, say, blister packs or discarded chemical bottles. You show not just for the prosecution and conviction, but then you show later on that although we found an ounce of methamphetamine inside the house, by looking at the discarded chemical bottles, blister packs, and we look at the supply they had waiting, we can show where their conspiracy is to overall, they've had enough here to produce a pound of methamphetamine. Well, that goes towards sentencing. So, and that's knowledge that gets lost if people aren't doing these types of cases. So it's important to have people trained and then also to hear from people with good experience what they're looking at.
Well, even on that, I will say for frontline officers, one of the scariest things is when you walk into those situations because you're scared that something's going to blow up, you bump into something wrong or you step the wrong way. Also, there's the concern of just what you're breathing in. I mean, we walk into enough homes where it's pretty dirty and disgusting and who knows what you're inhaling half the time. But one of the things you were talking about there was maybe you only find a small amount, but when you look at the setup that they have, the capabilities, I guess would be the word to use, the production capabilities, you're actually, this is a lab that could produce a lot. We're looking at a lot of doses. That's one thing that we had up here in the Falklands area in BC, and I think it was 80 million doses. It was 80 million doses of fentanyl. It was something like it could basically kill the Canadian population 2 times over. Just that one lab. But they kept saying, no, we're not. None of this is getting exported. We don't have any information. It's who are you making this for? Just the common sense argument would be, where would this be going? Because it's not for Canada. Not every person in Canada is doing fentanyl. So, it is the effect. You're a lot of what you're saying there. There's the effect on law enforcement, but what about politics? When you start seeing these things shifting now domestically, how do you convince or go educate on the political side? Because they're the ones who make the policy that allow you to do the things you do, or they change the laws of how it's going to be prosecuted. Do you have any involvement with training them, educating them?
Throughout my years, you always have these issues. And again, it starts with going from I'm a law enforcement professional. I've done this case. Then you have a prosecutor. And the prosecutor may not understand. So you have to make them understand. You have to show them, such as production capability and what was already produced before, plus what was there. That's how you get your sentencing. A lot of times that's kind of missed if they're not aware of it and they haven't worked these type of cases.
That is a good point.
And then there are some politicians that will actually come out and want to see that. The best thing is when you have management, leadership. I don't want to say management. I hate that word, management. Management and law enforcement is what we tend to have too much instead of leadership. Leadership in law enforcement, when they see politicians, if the political machine is affecting our ability to protect our communities, and we need to do something about that. We, law enforcement, have to do that. Our professionals, our leadership has to go and not be afraid to go stand up and say, listen, try it obviously in private first and say, let me help you understand what we're dealing with and show them. And some of the most amazing things you'll ever see is when you have political leaders taking that time to come out and see and then learn from the actual people on the street and through their leaders showing exactly what's happening and how dangerous these things are. And especially clandestine drug labs. They're toxic environments. They can explode. They can have fires and people can die just from that, let alone from the drug. So once you're able to show that to politicians, and hopefully the politicians will then make those decisions based on the safety of their communities and the people as they serve. That's how it gets done, though. You have to have leadership at every level. You have to push that up the chain and make people understand just how dangerous these things are.
It's funny you mentioned the difference between the management and leadership. So that was something that I dealt with in my career, where we didn't think we were getting the traction within our own police service that we needed to on some issues. And actually through this podcast, I had a bunch of local politicians, provincial politicians on the show. So I said, hey, why don't you come out on a ride along and we'll actually show you what everyone's talking about? Because there's only so much you can convey by words. And if you're not good at articulating it, you might not be getting your point across. So, we brought a whole bunch of people out on ride-alongs. And I'll tell you right now that like one night doing a ride-along, I think was worth like 2 years of effort in some respects. Like when we're trying to make things happen, push some policy changes, maybe get some resources. You bring people out and, if you don't get the curse of the ride along, because sometimes when you have ride alongs, nothing happens. But, when they come out and they actually are able to see some things, that is huge. That is a game changer. So one of the big things I always try to do is encourage politicians to go out, especially if they're local, like your municipal politicians. You should be doing a ride along with all your emergency services once a year. Like it's not hard to find one day in a whole year. Go with fire, go with your paramedics, go with your law enforcement, and actually see what they're dealing with. Because again, as we're talking here, things change. The criminal element shifts all the time. It's like, okay, what's new? What's changed in your world? How do we help you? How do we protect our citizens? Especially with the domestic supply, like you're saying, shifting more, or the supply shifting more domestically. That's a huge concern. One of the things I was wondering if you could also talk a bit about was, do you expect to see an increase in violence if these things become more local? If people start producing more locally, will that affect the level of violence?
Violence always goes with drug trafficking. There's no way around that. I would say there's more of an increase. To me, I just don't see a major difference in violence. Just because you have drug labs, I see more of a difference in community safety when it comes to the toxic environments created. Unknowingly, people can be exposed to this. Especially, I mentioned the one pot lab. Someone can go to a motel hotel, cook methamphetamine in that hotel room for 3 or 4 days or a week, and then leave. And then a family might be the next ones to check in, and they have a small baby, and they let the baby crawl around on the carpet in the hotel room. And there's still residual methamphetamine and toxic fumes and things that are in that hotel room. It hasn't been decontaminated fully. because nobody was arrested and they wasn't discovered. These are just simple things. In the United States, we had a problem with people who would have a meth lab in a house. The homeowner would just sell the house immediately, and the people who moved in didn't know that there was a drug lab there.
Oh,
So
really?
now we have an entire reporting process. Every time a drug lab is discovered in the United States, we fill out a form and it goes to a central intelligence repository, and it goes and it notifies any real estate issues related to that. So these are some safety issues. Just like we could find a lab inside of a vehicle, we would actually do a letter to the Department of Motor Vehicles in Florida and say this vehicle was used as a drug lab or for transportation of toxic chemicals. It can't be sold unless somebody certifies that it's been cleaned and decontaminated. So that car can't even be sold anymore.
I don't even know if we do that in Canada. I've never even heard of that. And I mean, we pull lots of drugs out of vehicles.
I don't know the Canadian process on that. I do know a lot of professionals in Canada who do work labs, and they are some of the best out there. They know the job. They're great people. Like the law enforcement, they're always out there trying to get their job done. They do have to deal with political issues and judicial issues, and there are differences between Canadian law and U.S. law when it comes to prosecution and different things. But all in all, the guys on the street, they're out there doing it. They're working, they're humping, and they're good at what they do. They know the job. They're out there trying to protect the communities that they're working in.
Do you think with some of the shifts in supply and demand and where things are going to be produced, are we going to see more of a certain type of drug? Are we going to see, are there certain trends? Is anything coming back that kind of had gone away, or are people going to just stick to fentanyl and just keep turning that into something stronger? Like, are there certain trends with the drug community right now?
Well, the drug labs, and actually with fentanyl, if you want to call it fentanyl, we also have isonitazines or nitazines. It's even more potent than fentanyl. They're being produced now. In the drug world, they're always looking, especially the synthetic drug world. So fentanyl is a synthetic drug. You're going to see, if we do see labs increase, which I strongly believe it's going to happen, just because if the supply goes down, the demand doesn't. And if there's a smuggling routes that are affected, most likely drug labs are going to increase. Mm-hmm. But that being said, on the take that you're going with, we have to look at the type of drug that you might see on the street more. There's a fairly decent chance that cocaine will be harder to get because we can't produce that here. Cocaine and heroin need a plant-based. That's where it comes from. It starts from a plant. Alkaloids from plants are then used to make the drug. Versus synthetic drug labs, I can make fentanyl all day long if I have the chemicals and the precursors I need. Same thing with methamphetamine, Molly or MDMA, isonitazines. There are a lot of drugs that are synthetic, which can be produced without any kind of a plant or some kind of a natural product that's part of that chain. It's just cold medicine or certain chemicals that are used as precursors that are then transformed into, through a laboratory process, an illegal drug.
It sounds like essentially, in my experience too, I've seen they're always looking for a way to make the drugs smaller. And that has to do with like detection, avoiding detection, but also makes it easier to transport. You can bring more of it. They're looking to make things cheaper. So whatever they can produce cheaply and is a more readily available, say, ingredients, and then just whatever's available. So, those seem to be like some really big factors in like what type of drugs we actually see increasing and where the money tends to go. Like you're saying, the fentanyl, now it's nitazines, and the synthetics seem like that's kind of the trend we're on, that we're going to see more of those or different types of those, because it's just changing a chemical compound, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's always been the case, and that's what's so dangerous about fentanyl, and especially the isonitazine, isotonal nitazines, all the different types of nitazines, that they have to be manufactured, and that's one specific thing about those type of production labs. They have to make the actual product into such a fine powder that if you don't, there's just the chunks of the actual drug or the piece is actually too big. It's like the difference between salt and say powdered sugar.
Yeah.
If I have salt, table salt, and I put it in my hand and I toss it, it's going to fly over a little bit and it's going to hit the ground. Whereas if I take powdered sugar and I throw it in the air, it's going to aerosolize. And that's, again, some of the more dangerous aspects of it. But they are always trying to find ways to chemically change these drugs to make them more potent. But it's also what they're trying to do when they do that is they're trying to change the drug so that it's not illegal.
Yep.
Like in the United States, it used to take us a great deal of time to identify a drug and then make it illegal. Then we came up with emergency scheduling. So when we find a new drug, when DEA gets a new drug inside of a drug laboratory and they say, this is a different form of some type of opioid or some type of even stimulant drug that's extremely dangerous, as soon as they identify it and they confirm that, they're able to take it to a board that can make an emergency declaration that that's illegal. That used to take years. But that's what they're doing. So until they actually have that emergency declaration and that lawful identification, they can produce that drug and sell it on the street, but they can't be prosecuted for it. There are just issues with that. So besides making them more potent and more available, it's also they're trying to beat the prosecution aspect of it.
Yeah.
And what they discovered, they can make more dangerous drugs and more potent drugs at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, that requires us on the good side to be nimble and quick on these things. I just want to talk a little bit about what you're currently doing with SoRite, and ties into all this stuff we've been chatting about. So, what does your job entail now? And obviously, you're out doing some public speaking and educating people. But you want to tell us a bit about your role with SoRite?
Sure, I got connected with SoRite because of one of their products. They produce a product which is SoRite Decon. Mm-hmm. SoRite Decon kills fentanyl. Basically changes its chemical structure and destroys it and neutralizes it in 60 seconds. Which, being such a dangerous drug, that makes a lot of sense. The other part of it also is very safe. It's rated by the EPA in the United States at level 4 for toxicity, which is the same as water. So for inhalation, ingestion, and skin contact, it's rated as safe as water. So it destroys fentanyl. That doesn't mean you want to drink it. It just that's not what we're saying, and we don't want you. We want people to understand that the bad part about fentanyl is a lot of times you'll have an overdose death, or you'll have a person who gets arrested and they have fentanyl on their body around them. This is a product that you can spray on a police car's car seats. You can spray it on anything that has been contaminated with fentanyl. You wait 60 seconds and it's been destroyed. It can't harm you anymore. Now, of course, in law enforcement, we would like to collect as much fentanyl or dangerous drugs as we can before we clean up at the end. But because fentanyl is such a dangerous drug, it's nice to have a decon solution that is so simple and easy versus other decontamination solutions. They are more caustic. Mm-hmm. They're very effective and they have their purpose. But SoRite Decon, because it's so safe, as soon as you're done cleaning up after an arrest, or let's say you show up at an overdose, and they load the overdose subject into a gurney. Now they throw them in the back of a ambulance and they take them to a hospital. Well, in that whole route, now that gurney might have fentanyl powder on it, because if it's on the person, it's going to get on the gurney. If it gets in the back of the ambulance. So this is a very simple decontamination solution that can be sprayed on just about anything, and it's not caustic like other things. People use bleach and water to decontaminate fentanyl. It takes longer for that to kill fentanyl, but bleach is very caustic with rubber, plastic, different things. If you spray it on equipment, it's going to make it discolored. Our decontamination solution doesn't do that. SoRite has other products as well that are amazing for law enforcement and for the professional hospital world as well. But this decon solution, I was impressed with it, and I still am. It's a very good tool for decontamination when you add it to other decontamination processes.
I was thinking when you said about drinking it, though, I was like, well, wouldn't that be a good sales tactic to, decontaminate and then you're able to drink it right after? It makes me think of, someone who can turn like, what was that sales thing there? You take dirty water and like they put it through the process and then they're drinking it after. I was like, oh, it might be one way to sell, but
no, we're not selling it that way.
yeah,
Don't drink SoRite decon.
we're just coming up to the end of our time here. Where is the best place for people to follow your work and check out what you're up to?
Well, right now, SoRite has their website, and they've got me listed on there, and they're head of narcotics training. I can also, I have a website that's going to be launched very soon for my company as well. I'll have to share that with you sometime. Maybe we can get a link put up.
Yeah.
I can give you an email address for people to contact me if you'd like.
Okay.
You want to do that here, or you want to do that? You're going to put it up after the interview.
I'll put everything in the episode description. So, any links, check out, obviously the SoRite Company, their website. I've listed them before, but for anyone who hasn't seen it or wants to get in touch can go there. And any social media or anything where you're putting stuff out regularly?
Yeah, I do have a Facebook page and I've got Instagram, but we're building those up right now. So I'll just share those with you and you can put them on the link, like you said, for the episode.
Great.
And if I can, I would like to mention one thing.
Yeah, give her.
You were talking about politicians and we were talking about law enforcement. And the most important thing is for them to work together. Well, right now, because of in the US and I hope in Canada, that the flow of certain drugs into Canada that comes through the United States, because some drugs do get smuggled through the United States into Canada. I spent time in Vancouver. I saw the homeless encampments there. They call them homeless encampments. They're not homeless encampments. Just like they're not homeless encampments in the United States. They're drug dens.
Yeah.
If I'm homeless, I can go to a homeless shelter. I can seek help from religious organizations. I can get a place to stay safe. I can get educational help, professional help, and I can turn my life around if I want to. Homeless encampments, as they call them, are just drug dens. They're full of drug addicts, and a high percentage of the people there are also mentally ill. They have issues with their mental stability, and they can be dangerous, but they also are dangerous to themselves just for their drug use. On the aspect I told you, the reduction of supply, if politicians want to make a real big difference right now, the supply's gone down. The prices are going up. If they want to help people, this is a great time to try and do something about this homeless, as they call it, problem. Get the people off the streets. The reason they go to those homeless encampments is because they don't want to go to a homeless shelter, because there are rules there, such as you can't use drugs and you can't drink while you're there. So with that reality, people don't want to go there and they put their lives in danger. Politicians, if they want to really change things, they can turn it around and maybe save quite a few lives if they just try and take some steps. San Francisco is doing this right now. The new mayor is actually doing some things with mental health and cleaning up the homeless encampments on the streets, as they call them. I call them drug dens. Same thing with drug dens all over the United States. If people want to really take a shot, our federal government right now is kind of pushing the resurgence of mental health facilities, which I think would help a lot of people as well. So people want to take a bite out of crime and out of drugs and out of the pain and suffering of it. Politicians and law enforcement can work together to try and do something about these drug dens that are all over the place, and maybe reduce the demand a little bit at the same time we're reducing supply.
Hey, I'm all for it, and it's always a good way to end the shows with some solutions. So I appreciate you being on here today, and it was really informative. I think people will get a lot out of this. So thanks for what you're doing, and thank you for being a guest on the show. Just hang tight for 2 seconds. We'll say bye offline.
Okay, sounds good. Appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.